Hello everybody. As you can see, I'm back from my tournament. This tournament was the Winter Derby. I have just finished the very last match. And first of all, let's talk about the tournament itself. It's always a pleasure to play in either Winter Derby or Summer Derby because this is the biggest tournament ever. And this time the record for the number of players has been broken once again. And I don't remember the exact number. I believe it's 350 something players from all over the world. Absolutely amazing. And it is worth noting that when I started playing Winter Derby, it was in late 2017, we had, I believe, about 5 times less players than that. Can you imagine? This is, of course, partially explained by the fact that a lot of people are staying indoors. They are not able to get some games in person, so we had an influx of players, but also more people are getting into old school, and that's always a pleasure to see. I have met some of the old friends. I have encountered great new players that I haven't played with before, and it was certainly a pleasure. We also saw a very interesting, I would say, metagame situation. I'm not entirely sure what the overall picture is going to look like because I have only seen 8 decks, as you can imagine. But the people that played against me, out of these people, nobody actually played the deck. Nobody actually played the usual control-ish kind of a deck, which is very popular in Swedish rules. I didn't see any blue and white control. I saw a lot of white and red. I saw a lot of aggro decks. I saw even more mid-range decks, some interesting synergies. So overall it was a pleasure. So let me talk to you about my deck. My deck, as you can see, is Atog. It is a mono red, white and red Atog. I'm going to explain this to you. As you can see here, all the cards that I've got are red. This is a suboptimal build. I decided to go with it because simply I felt like doing this, and I don't really regret this because, of course, the optimal build would include more restricted cards. It would be at least blue and red. It would maybe include some other cards. It might have been a 5-color Atog, but I decided to just go with it, and I'm really happy about it. I lost 5 matches, won 3 matches. In the matches I lost, sometimes I only lost 2 games and won 1. Sometimes I lost 2-0. So it has been a mixed bag. It's not perfect, of course, but then again, we had only top 16, which was almost impossible to get into. If you can imagine how many players we had, this was not enlarged to top 32 or anything of the sort, and still really happy with the result that I had. So let's talk about the mana base first. We've got Black Lotus, obviously. We've got a Pearl. As I said, it's a white and red mono red deck, and you will see why. We've got the Mox, and we also have the Soul Ring. Remember that all of these artifacts, even the Lotus, which doesn't usually stay on the battlefield for a long time, but still they can be fed to our voracious Atog. This deck is very mana heavy, and I'm going to explain some of my decisions and choices. You have got these cards, as I have just said. You've got 11 mountains, which is a lot. I didn't go for the off-color Moxen. Maybe I should have. But then again, it's just something that I decided to go with. I did not want to look into the good deck lists. I just remembered what people played against me. I remember that there is this very nice soft lock of the Ang, Black Vise, and Winter Orb. I just remember that, and I went along with it. But okay, let's continue. 4 plateaus, which usually seems a bit strange to people. Yeah, they sometimes feel that I play a 2-color deck, which I do in some way, but only in the sideboard. We've got 1 Strip Mine, and we've got 4 Mishra's Factories. And overall, we have got 24 mana sources. Of course, it's not really correct to count Strip Mine as a mana source. More often than not, it's just a free removal spell, and the same situation is with Mishra's Factories. But here it can be justified because I very often don't need red mana, very often I will simply need colorless mana for all of these artifacts, sorry. So yeah, the deck is quite mana hungry, but still let me show you what it's about. Of course we've got 4 Atogs. Atog is for a very long time was a neglected card. For a very long time it was a neglected card, as you know. It's a card that nobody wanted, but only later on people started to understand how good it is. And in the Mirrodin reprint, I believe the flavor text for him was on Dominaria a scavenger, on Mirrodin a predator. So now it's becoming a predator in Dominaria as well. And of course it would be nice to make a red and green Atog Smash deck, but that one is very vulnerable with Berserks, so there are actually more interesting things about this deck than just smashing for a lot with the Atog. We got Wheel of Fortune, one of the red staples. I always like using it in red decks. Of course I will usually have Lightning Bolt, Chain Lightnings, Forks, so very often I am able to capitalize on that right away. So definitely one of the cases where I need the wheel. No commentary on Lightning Bolts, the staples of course. The same is true of Chain Lightnings. Chain Lightning did bite me a couple of times, unfortunately, where I was playing against people who had a lot of red mana. There were some red heavy decks, and I didn't side it out against them, and I sometimes lost the War of the Bolts, so to say. And yeah, I'm not sure if this is a card that you always want, but of course it gives you some reach, and there is this nice burn element. Next we have got Stone Rain, a card that I know is not typical. It's not a card that you usually see in Atog decks, but first of all I always fear the library, and this is definitely a good card for dealing with the library. And you can also use it with the fork if you've got the forks. So very often this will play to our advantage in case we have got I don't know, Winter Orb. So there are many ways to lock your opponent down, and with early aggression, and also Ankh of Mishra, of course, it's very important, the synergy with the Ankh. So overall I was really happy, and it's certainly not a card that people would expect in an Atog build. So speaking of forks, I believe this is a very, very skill intense card. We're going to have a separate video on that, talking about some of the most skill intense cards. And I believe that fork is, of course, can be used at least as a copy of your own Chain Lightning or Lightning Bolt to finish off your opponent, but there are so many more things that you can use this for. Even in your own deck, you can use it with Stone Rain. Can you imagine how brutal it is? Double Stone Rain for 5 mana. Then you can also use it against your opponent if they're doing something really powerful. Let's say, I don't know, Mind Twist you, Fireball you for a lot. And remember, yours will resolve actually before theirs. So that's one more thing you can do. So the possibilities of using fork are limitless. You just have to make sure that you keep 2 red mana open, and it's not always possible with this deck. So enough talking about the red cards, let's talk about the artifacts, because after all, this is what the Atog is in this deck. We've got 4 Black Vise. Black Vise is of course very good as a starting card. If you are on the play, you are going to put it into play, and your opponent will take 3 damage instantaneously, as you understand. And also, of course, Black Vise is good with this. It is also good with... Sorry for the jump cut. So yes, even though Black Vise will very often be a dead card against our opponent, depending on what they have, you will always be able to eat it with the Atog. So this is one of the good things. And if we take into consideration the presence of 4 Ankh of Mishra, the 4 Ankhs here, you've got the Ankhs, you've got Black Vise, as I said, and Winter Orb. This is an amazing lock because when your opponent draws a card, they will be afraid to go over 4 cards because of Black Vise, but they will not be able to play cards without any pain, because if they play a land, then Ankh of Mishra will hit them, and then if we have Winter Orb, even though this is one of those cards that I very often sided out, still your opponent will not be able to use a lot of these things and will be forced to play more land. So this is an amazing lock. It is an amazing lock. Then we have got Copper Tablets. I believe it is a card that for a very long time was somehow underrated, and people are starting to understand its power. Of course, it does hit here as well, but the first good thing about it is that we always should think about when the effects start happening, right? So you, of course, want the negative effects to start happening during your opponent's turn, and then only get these, and you want the good effects to happen before your opponent gets to have them. So, of course, Copper Tablet is one of those negative effects that will hit your opponent first, so very often this will even be this 1 point of damage that you actually need to deal to your opponent to kill them, finish them off. So it is a nice card. And let's also not forget that with Atog we are going to decide when some of the symmetric cards are going to work and when they're not going to work. So you can use this against your opponent. Then if you are low on life, you can sacrifice it to the Atog and not have any damage. The same is true about Ankhs, right? You will keep your opponent from playing some lands, but as soon as you want to play a land, you will be able to sacrifice it to the Atog. So there are many things like that. And the same is true and is definitely even more relevant, more important when we talk about Winter Orb. Of course, we will sacrifice it at the end of our opponent's turn if we are tapped out and we want to untap everything and maybe play one more orb. Why not? A really good card. And then I know that this is a bad deck building choice, but I just felt like it. The Wreck, 3 copies, not 4, because I didn't have any room for them. In fact, I did. Maybe I should have cut one mountain. But still, the Wreck, of course, is good because, first of all, your opponent doesn't expect it. We don't really have any means to make our opponent discard their cards, but in case they don't have many cards, we can drop this late in the game and deal a couple additional damage, which might be a relevant and important thing. But of course I very often sided this card out, and this is not a good decision. You can play around it, you can have 4 cards and have no damage at all. So, Fork. Right, there is 1 more copy in the sideboard, and very often I would put it in. Then the reason why I decided to use white, this is of course because I'm really afraid of Circle of Protection Red. Circle of Protection Red has destroyed many red decks. It has killed a lot of strategies, so that's why I thought, okay, I need disenchants, and I went with a playset of these. Sometimes I would board them in, and I do not regret doing this, but other than that, it is a proper mono red deck. Then we have got 2 Relic Barriers. There are these nice combos with Relic Barrier and Winter Orb. You simply turn it off at the end of your opponent's turn. You untap, but they don't. But I usually didn't use this card. I also thought that it might be nice, for example, tapping our opponent's mana sources and, you know, using some mana denial strategies, or maybe tapping big creatures such as Suchis and such, but I didn't really use it. So maybe these were just a couple of dead slots, which couldn't be said about City in a Bottle. City in a Bottle is brutal. We know how powerful it is. I only had some suspicions about how good it is. This is the very first time I have been playing this card in a deck. I absolutely loved it. It is so powerful. It destroys your opponent's Cities of Brass, and we know how many players actually play Cities of Brass for the splash. for the numerous restricted cards and some powerful stuff. So not only does it destroy City of Brass for 2 mana, it also prevents them from coming into play. It kills Jusam Djinns, and so many decks are simply shut down by this card. It is a broken card. It's absolutely amazing. It's one of those cards that people are currently discussing whether it should be somehow limited in its power or not. But yeah, of course, I think it's fair to keep it as is. I only have 1 copy. I would have probably played a couple more if I could, but even 1 was good. Blood Moons. Now, speaking of Blood Moons, here is very interesting because we know that Blood Moon is a card that shut down many of our opponents' strategies if they're dealing with a multicolor deck and if they don't have red themselves, by the way. And I would very often side it in, saying, okay, my opponent has more than 1 color, so I'm going to go with Blood Moon. This was a mistake very often, and maybe it wasn't a mistake to side it in, but it was a mistake to play it sometimes, effectively turning my Mishra's Factories and, for example, Strip Mines into mountains, and this way I was denying myself of good creatures and finishers. So I'm really not entirely sure about this. So Blood Moon, we know that it is a very good card, but you have to be very careful with it, and it's not always that you have to use it against your opponent's multicolored decks. And even if you do, you should think how to play around that so that it doesn't hit you. And I had 4 red elemental blasts. Again, as I said, surprisingly, I didn't see a lot of blue heavy decks, but of course we saw the power, we saw Serendib Efreets, which are really ubiquitous nowadays, and yeah, these were quite useful against them. In the hindsight, I would probably include a couple Swords to Plowshares, because I unfortunately could die to some big creatures, creatures with 4 toughness, again talking about Serendibs, and also Suchis, and of course Jusam Djinn as well. So this might have been a good decision, or maybe even Spirit Link, I don't know. So these things could have been good, but then again, I'm really satisfied with the result. I love this deck. I'm going to build 1 more Atog deck in the future, maybe even more than 1, why not? And once again, thank you everyone I have played against. Thank you DFB for organizing this marvelous tournament, and looking forward to the next derby. It's not going to be soon as we think now, but you know, time goes by, it goes by really quickly, so it's probably going to happen sooner than you think. And meanwhile, I'd like to thank you for watching, and I will see you soon. Bye.